Welcome to this National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science education webinar focused on building back to dancing at your best, injury care. My name is Erin Sanchez, and I'm the manager of the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science. The National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science, also called NIDMS, exists to enhance dance students and professionals' health, well-being, and performance through high-quality scientific knowledge, evidence-based practice, and better, more affordable access to first-class dance-specific healthcare and dance science support services, both in private practice and in the NHS across the UK. NIDMS is a network of multidisciplinary partners, including Birmingham Royal Ballet, the University of Wolverhampton, the University of Birmingham, One Dance UK, Trinity Laban Conservatoire of Music and Dance, and the Royal Ballet. Our partners are represented by Professor Emma Redding, Dr. Nick Allen, Professor Matthew Wyan, Professor Joan Duda, Dr. Roger Woolman, and our speaker today, Shane Kelly. Today's session is the first in a series of online educational sessions offered by NIDMS. Our focus of these sessions is to provide ongoing opportunities to share best practice, discuss current issues, and keep up to date with emerging clinical practice and research in dance medicine and science and dancers' health. For those of you who may also be leaders, healthcare practitioners, or researchers, a series of sessions focused on evidence-based practice are available for catch-up on the NIDMS website and will continue into the new year. Our next session in this series on building back to dancing at your best will take place in the new year as well. This will feature a mini S&C training session and guidance on healthy nutrition for dance. Please do get in touch if you're interested in attending any of these sessions. Please do contact myself, which is manager@nidms.co.uk, to be added to the mailing list. Right, just a little bit of housekeeping for me to finish up. So we'll have about 40 minutes of presentation with some opportunities for discussion interspersed within that. And then at the end of the session, we'll have time for some more formal question and answer time. You can put your questions into the Q&A box. You're also welcome to put any questions into the chat box or any comments or discussion points into the chat box as well. And you can use the Q&A box to upvote questions. So if someone else has asked a question that you're also interested in finding the answer to, you can just click to upvote that, and that'll bring the question to the top of the queue. So without any further ado, I would like to pass you over to Shane Kelly, and he will be talking to you a little bit more about injury.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Just bear with me while I try and share my screen and bring up the presentation. Just 1 second. Go with this one. Can you see the screen?
Yep, can see.
Not quite got the view I wanted. Go with this one. Try again, thanks, Aaron. Show presentation. Okay, is that normal PowerPoint view for you there, Aaron?
Yep, that looks perfect.
All right, great. Thanks for bearing with me there, guys, and thanks for coming along on this gloomy, grey December afternoon. You couldn't be anywhere better than here inside and warm and watching this presentation. I've tried to give this a little bit of a catchier title today, but my presentation, I've called it Perfect Performance, so pardon the pun there, but how to manage injury and stay on stage. A little bit of a warning, I suppose. First up, it is going to be very ballet injury related, but very much the principles of injury prevention and injury management hold across other dance genres as they hold across many other sports. So I'm bringing in lessons from sport and applying them in dance as well. So everything you hear today should be very practical and applicable to you. I'm very grateful for Erin for having me along and Nidams for having me along and inviting me to present to a group of young dancers today. I really enjoy presenting to dancers. That's my thing. That's what I'm passionate about. And injury and illness prevention is something that I really try and drive here at the Royal Ballet. So on to the presentation. Before we move into it proper, just a little bit about myself. As Erin mentioned, I'm clinical director with Ballet Healthcare here at the Royal Ballet. I'm a physiotherapist by trade, but I have only worked in dance for a few years. And before moving into dance, I worked in Olympic sport and I worked in athletics, so track and field, where I was a physiotherapist there for 15 years. Since the start of the job here at the Royal Ballet, I've tried to bring in my experiences of working with sport and bring them into a dance setting. So whether in sport or in dance, I think the therapist and athlete or dancer relationship is universal, and so are the injury and injury management principles, as I've already mentioned. So a bit of what I'm representing today, you'll hear the mention of sport and sporting principles as well, but they're all relevant to each other. In terms of the specifics of the presentation, we have a bit on injury background. So we'll just have a little bit of background knowledge passing on what is injury. Then I'll talk about specific injuries in ballet generally, some specific presentations, and then finally the performance support team that can be around you to help if you do get injured. The first section really covers some concepts of injury, some terminology, which I think we all need to have a common ground on before we get into the bulk of the presentation. Injury in ballet and common injury prevention is where I intend to spend most of my time. At the final part, we will only spend 5 minutes at the end about how we can use the dance support network. So let's get into it. Injury concepts. Let's all get on the same page. And I'm going to start with a little bit of an icebreaker and a really, really easy one. Probably one that I don't need you to answer back and unmute yourself, but have just a quick think for a second and ask yourself, do dancers get injured? And I'm pretty sure most of you would say, yes, of course they get injured. And I can imagine that some of you here, unfortunately, in the audience today have been injured yourself. And I think, whether you're a dancer or you're an athlete, your performance is your thing. It's potentially your livelihood. And therefore, if your livelihood depends on it, then you would like to take, I'm sure you would like to take some ownership of that very thing that delivers your livelihood and take some ownership of your body. So really today, I'm going to intersperse a few key lessons. My lesson number one for today is it's your performance, therefore your body and your responsibility. And I really want to get across that whether you're a dancer or an athlete, that if you're going to own your performance, that you need to be responsible for your own body. So the fact that you're sitting here today, trying to learn, trying to show ownership, trying to take responsibility is a magnificent thing. And I applaud you all for being here today to hear the rest of the talk. So we'll try and share with you some more lessons as we go along. So to follow on this, do dancers get injured concept, again, I'm going to start with another question. Don't expect you to answer, don't necessarily have to unmute yourself, but I just want to ask, who here has had an injury before? So perhaps some imaginary hands up there. I'm not necessarily looking, I can't see who's in the audience today, but some imaginary hands up of who's had an injury. The only reason I ask that is because if you have, then you'd understand these three buckets sitting in front of you here today. The three buckets as labeled are severe pain, time off, and surgery. And we can see that you really don't want to end up in any of these buckets, and you should do anything really to avoid, at all costs, avoid injury. So to do that, again, knowledge is power. And today I'm here to empower you and take that journey of self-efficacy and self-responsibility and really, sorry, there's something here on the side that's distracting me, thank you. Really take that journey of self-efficacy and self-discovery so we can avoid ending up in one of these buckets. So bear with me now. We've got 5 minutes, five minutes of injury theory, but we do have to talk about injury types because injury types define how we manage certain types of injuries. So there are 3 injury types. The first one being acute or sudden onset injury. And this definition comes from the International Olympic Committee. And so bear with me while I just reread it for you. But acute injuries are injuries that occur with a definable inciting incident event as a result of a transference of a large amount of kinetic energy. Now, kinetic energy is movement energy. So these are your sort of injuries that occur as a result of slips, trips, falls, lands, bumps, sprains, and strains. Again, imaginary hands up here, but who here has had an acute injury before of this type, a sudden onset injury? Again, I'm pretending I'm going to see a range of hands across the audience, but I'm sure there have been a few of you that have had acute injuries before. And these are the ones, again, that catch you by surprise. You don't necessarily have an idea that they're going to happen, but they happen there and then in the moment, and they're really clear that happen. So acute injuries, try and remember that concept. The next concept in terms of injury types is repetitive injuries. Now, these used to be called, and still are in some circles, overuse injuries. And there's 2 types of repetitive injuries. There's ones that occur subclinically, i.e. you won't have any signs and symptoms that something's coming, and then all of a sudden an injury event happens. And this is something like a tendon rupture or a spontaneous stress fracture. Now, these things are very rare, thankfully, so we don't all have to go home tonight and worry that we're sort of down the track or have some sort of looming repetitive sudden onset injury coming, but they are a subcategory of a certain type of injury that we do need to be aware of and have different management outcomes. The final one, and one that's probably most relevant to this population today, is your repetitive and gradual onset injuries. And this injury occurs through the accumulation of kinetic energy over time with gradual onset of symptoms. And this is your likes of your tendinopathies, stress reactions, fasciopathies, and other injuries where you notice a little bit of symptoms, so normally pain early on, a little bit of pain might turn into a moderate amount of pain, which might turn into severe pain. And then as that pain starts to set in, your level of dysfunction sets in. And perhaps some of you have been there before, but we'll talk about why we want to avoid that in this presentation. And really, again, this presentation today is going to mainly focus on those sorts of overuse injuries because they are the ones that we see more typically in dance and specifically ballet. So, second last bit of injury theory today is the repetitive injury model. And I bring it up so we can only understand the concepts later, but it is worth going through. So if we take, my little laser pointer is working today, which is fantastic. If we take the repetitive injury model, so if you replace the word training with dance, and let's say you increase your dance effort, this dance effort on a daily basis, whether that's class, rehearsal, or a performance, will increase stress on your tissues. That's pretty common sense. And we can talk about any of these tissues here, whether that's bone, muscle, ligament, cartilage, all these things. You know, this stress does microscopic tissue damage to your whole skeletal system. And that's fine in normal circumstances, because what happens, the tissue breaks down a little bit, the body remodels, and if that remodeling rate outstrips the rate of tissue damage, i.e. your body builds itself back quicker than the damage is occurring, what you get is a positive adaptation and you get stronger tissue, and you turn up to ballet training the next day and you go again. The issue with overuse or repetitive type injuries is you get through this stage, the rate of damage starts to outstrip remodeling, and those micro tears, that microscopic damage, increases into bigger levels of damage, inflammation, and other internal bodily processes, which then lands you in an overuse injury setting in, which then may force you to change your training effort, which has other negative consequences as well. Final bit of injury theory is the sort of risk factor model for injury occurrence and injury prevention. Every injury is influenced, every bit of sports participation is influenced by risk. There are certain risk factors to your sport or your type of dance, and these risk factors change depending on your environment. The main thing is that there are some that you can influence, and there's some that you can't. So the ones that you can't influence are called your non-modifiable risk factors. And this is your age, your gender, previous injury, and genetics. These are things that have been proven from a research point of view to be things that influence injury risk either positively or negatively. These two here are the ones that you guys have something to do about. And that is why I bring them up, because this is the stuff that we're going to talk about through the rest of this presentation today. Partly modifiable are the things that, from common sense, are things that you can partly influence. So sometimes you can influence the equipment you use or the clothes you wear. You have some choice in that, but sometimes you don't. Equally, the environment that you train or rehearse in, you, again, sometimes have choice in that, but sometimes you don't. And then lastly, technique. Again, sometimes you can obviously change your technique or have an influence on the technique you use, but sometimes, like classical ballet, you don't have a choice in terms of how or what dance positions you can choose, and therefore it's only partly modifiable. There is choreography that you have to do, and therefore you sometimes don't have a choice. But these things here on the right, modifiable risk factors, this is all in your power, guys, and this is the stuff that will help give you a buffer from most types of repetitive or overuse injuries. So you can see here from this yellow box, we have training load, we have sleep, we have nutrition, and we just generally have other good health choices. And really, here comes my lesson number 2 for the day, is that your choices on a daily basis have a big bearing on your injury risk. So my challenge to you guys is, of course, to choose wisely. So that's your bit of injury theory done for the day. Try and remember that, take that in. We had our injury types, we had our repetitive injury model, and we had our risk factor model. So how are we going to take that into injury within our specific context? And what sort of injuries do we actually get in our context? So I'll go through that. That's for the next 5 or 10 minutes, and particularly ballet injury. So earlier this year, in the British Journal of Sports Medicine, this paper was published, and it came from actually the Royal Opera House Ballet Healthcare. Adam Matusi, the lead author here, is one of our S&C coaches, and there's a few other members of the team here as well. And this was a high quality study on professional ballet dancers. So it's very relevant to the environment and to the people here today. It's based on real dancers in a big company here in the UK, so very proximal to where all you guys are, and so therefore a good representation of what actually happens in a ballet company. And this epidemiology paper basically describes all the injuries and that we had across a ballet company over a 5-year period. And you can see from the title, there were 1,596 medical attention injuries. So medical attention injuries are just visits to the physio or to the doctor. But over that 5-year period, we had 543 time loss injuries. So that's about 110 odd time loss injuries per year. which, you know, it makes it a busy place sometimes at Ballet Healthcare. It sounds like a lot, but let's see how that stacks up against other sports. So this is a graph that's been sort of recreated from the paper. And this compares us, that's the Royal Ballet, compared to other ballet companies and some other sports. And I think it would be, obviously, the reason why I included it in today's presentation is I think it's interesting for you guys to see how ballet stacks up against, you know, other ballet companies, depending on where you are perhaps, but also to other sports. And if we start here at the top, 0.6, don't necessarily worry about what the 0.6 is. It just means the lower the number, the lower the frequency of injuries. So this we normally call our injury incidence. And in terms of the lowest injury incidence, there was a similar study done from the Swedish National Ballet, and they found that they had quite low injury incidence of 0.6. Again, don't worry about the number, just trust me when I say that it's quite low. Further from that, we have Royal Ballet. So this was from our paper. This was our injury incidence, 0.8 for the males, 0.9 for the females. So not too much difference there between the genders. Moving down, Houston Ballet was pretty similar ballet company in terms of injury incidence. And then we move further down the axis, and we see that sports like cricket and rugby union have a reasonably high, well, a higher incidence, moving down to Birmingham Royal Ballet, soccer training, Birmingham Royal Ballet again. Soccer match intensity has a higher incidence than obviously its training incidence. And then you get to some contact sports like ice hockey and rugby union, and all of a sudden injury incidence goes through the roof. So all I can say is be happy that you're not a rugby union player or an ice hockey player. I think as ballet dancers, we're doing okay, but that still doesn't mean that we shouldn't try and reduce injuries, even though they don't happen that often relatively. I included this slide as well because I think it's good for you guys to know where injuries happen if you're a dancer. And again, this is quite ballet specific, but I do think it applies to other forms of dance, and you may have your own experiences with this. But if you look at the graphic in front of you, you've got a ballerina, and of course, we have different body regions mapped out, and under each body region, we have a different percentage. And the percentage is obviously a percentage of what percentage of the ballet company had a head or neck injury. And then, so what we'll do is we'll review the percentages as we go around the body clockwise. As we said, head or neck is about 6% of the company had a head or neck injury over the 5 years on average, and males and females were quite similar. Upper limb percentage, 2 and 5%, so probably low percentages, I would say. Now we're getting into lumbar spine. We see the percentage of injuries there jump up 15, 30%. So that's getting warm in terms of where we tend to see our injuries in ballet dancers. The knee sort of drops back down a little bit again. Ankle, hello, we've got a big jump in injury percentage and injury rate in ankles, in the ankle region, slightly more in females than males. So good to know that. And then again, foot quite high in terms of looking at the other body areas, 16 and 16% for males and females in terms of most commonly injured body area. Moving back up the body now to sort of leg, which is sort of for the knee down, 12%. The thigh, only 2%, so really low injury rates in the thigh. We don't see that much. Hip is probably average, thoracic spine average, and then back to the head. So probably no surprises there. If you thought, if you knew this already, then well done, pat on the back. But just to summarize, you know, perhaps not surprising, as I say, that the majority of injuries within ballet tend to hit these three areas, at least from our study. And that was the lumbar spine, the ankle, and the foot. So the next question is, and this is where I am going to try it. I'm going to try anyway, get a little bit of audience participation going. If anyone's feeling brave enough to unmute themselves at this stage, but does anyone want to suggest one reason or one mechanism of injury that might mean that might explain, sorry, why ballet dancers get a higher rate of injury in their feet and ankles. Does anyone want to suggest why this happens so much in ballet? Drum roll, if this actually works. Silence, silence. All right, I might leave it, but there is a spoiler alert coming because I'm just going to tell you. So the reason that these injuries generally tend to happen, most of you are shouting this at the screen, I know that anyway, but from our study as well, is that jumping and landing was probably the most common mechanism for injury within the ballet company. And you see the different colors here. Females had a slightly lower rate of injury than the men. The men definitely had a higher rate of injury from jumping compared to the females. There were a bunch of injuries where we couldn't actually classify the mechanism, so we need to tidy that up for our future surveillance. But then certainly, as you may have expected as well, and some of you might have shouted this at the screen just before, but point work was a very common mechanism of injury and probably would have contributed to the foot and ankle injury rates as well. And you can see that that's exclusively in female dancers. There's no male dancers getting any injuries from point work. But yeah, if we look at our top three in terms of jump, landing, and point work, that would explain a lot of our foot and ankle injuries and the higher injury rates, at least in ballet. So again, ballet injury sort of overview generally, in terms of how much our dancers get injured, where they get injured, and why they get injured. So then now that brings us to the next section of the talk, common ballet injuries. And again, apologize a little bit if it's a bit ballet heavy, but I'm sure that those that aren't ballet dancers in the audience today will have seen or come across these sorts of injuries. So since it was so quiet on my last open answer question, I'm just going to get you guys to think to yourselves and but yet ask you another one in terms of what do you think are the most common ballet injuries? So take 10 seconds now. Perhaps have a think of an injury you've had yourself or something you might see a lot in a place where you work or where you train or where you rehearse. Okay, hopefully you've all got one injury in mind that you think is the one, the banker, the one that everyone gets. Have a think of that and now look at this list. Okay, so obviously the list says ankle sprain, posterior impingement, lower leg, foot and bone stress, spinal complaints, and hip complaints. Now I've taken that from two, again, scientific papers within ballet or from ballet. One was ours and the other one was done from Nick Allen in Birmingham Royal Ballet a few years ago. And sort of looking at the injury profiles from both of those papers, this is in terms of rank, almost the most common as we go down the list. Ankle sprain, posterior ankle impingement, lower leg, foot and bone stress, spinal complaints, and hip complaints. So if you got one of those five, well done. But for those who didn't, don't worry. We're going to learn a little bit more about the top three of these today. And this is all about today's journey about knowledge and empowerment is for the next 5 or 10 minutes. Well, more like 10 minutes, I'm going to go through these three injuries and I'm just going to try and cut to the most relevant and practical and best clinical advice I can give you without going into too much detail. It's like hopefully getting the cheat sheet on some of these injuries in terms of how to prevent them and how to manage them. There is, of course, lots more you can do, but within the confines of this presentation today, I'm going to try and signpost it to the most relevant stuff. And if you want to know more, hopefully you can take it further for yourselves after today. So as I said, three most common injuries in the next 10 minutes. I'm going to give you the cheat sheet on all of them. In terms of that cheat sheet, it's going to be structured like this. There's going to be some prevention tips, some management tips, and then the top tips. So let's get going. Let's start with ankle sprain. Now, if I had my big screen in front of me again, I'd ask you all, who here has had an ankle sprain before as a dancer? I'd imagine some of you have. Some of you have probably sprained your ankle more than once. Some of you have probably sprained both ankles more than once. Ideally, if we had a perfect world, you'd never sprain your ankle, but I know that's true. But, you know, I think you can all be forgiven for spraining your ankles once or twice, but if we could ever avoid a scenario where you are, you know, if you're a repeat ankle sprainer or what's called chronic ankle instability or insufficiency, we want to avoid that scenario at all costs. And therefore, I have put ankle sprain at #1 today in terms of your attention span and on top of your priority list in terms of avoiding, because the consequences of not managing an ankle sprain appropriately may have long-lasting ramifications on your dance career. And I say that with the utmost seriousness. So focusing on prevention, what do we know that, what's my sort of go-to cheat sheet thing about ankle injury strain prevention? The scientific research over and over again, as well as clinical experience and everything around here says the best and probably one of the only ways you can prevent ankle sprains effectively is through static and dynamics balance training, or as some people like to call it these days, neuromuscular training. It's a bit more technical term, but essentially static and dynamic and balance training of any kind should help you reduce your chances of an ankle sprain. And I've got a link here to a specific balance training program for dancers and ballet dancers here. And we're going to go through that in the next slide. So just hang in there for that. But we do have a great resource there that we can tap into straight away off the back of this presentation. When it comes to management of ankle sprains, what should you do there? Well, give it some peace and love. And I'm going to explain that one as well in a subsequent slide. But outside of peace of love, which is an acute management system, we need to have a comprehensive physio-led rehab. So who's ever had an ankle sprain? You know, there are obviously different degrees of ankle sprains. You know, you can have the ones where you sort of roll over your ankle a little bit and it hurts, and you walk a few ginger steps and you go, oof, okay, that wasn't too bad, and you walk it off and you can keep going. And I think for those sort of scenarios that it's okay, you probably don't have to take that seriously, but there are the ankle sprains, absolutely, that when you sprain your ankle, you obviously roll over, you take your ankle to an extreme range of motion, it either rolls in or it rolls out, and then in those extreme ranges of motion, damage occurs, and the damage normally occurs to the ligaments that hold your ankle together. Now, if you've taken your ankle to that extreme range of motion and you've potentially damaged ligaments and you get a tearing, a popping, you get instant swelling in your ankle, you can't walk for a few hours, you can't walk for a few days. In any of those scenarios, you need to go and see a physio. And that is why I've put this here, because those sorts of injuries to that severity are going to need a physio-led rehab program. It's not a case of give it a few days rest, let the swelling go down and then crack on, or tape the ankle up and then just keep going the next day. They are going to need physio-led rehab, and I'm going to hopefully convince you of why by the end of this presentation. So my top tips when it comes to ankle sprains is pretty much every ankle sprain needs management. Even if you don't think it's that bad, I would always advise to get an assessment and then let the physio decide whether it needs a rehab plan or not. I think taking up that decision on your own could be a bit risky in itself. If you do end up getting into an established rehab plan, make sure you complete it to its fullness and have a gradual return to dance. There's no prizes for cutting corners, and certainly don't come back if you still have swelling, pain, or instability. So if your ankle feels unstable, you shouldn't be trying to come back to dance on that sort of ankle. It's just not going to pay dividends in the future. So if we go back to prevention, And we go back to this balance training for dancers. I want to refer you to this reference in strengthmotionandmind.com and the 11 dance program. So this was set up by Elmhurst Dance School, and this was done as part of a PhD project. And a lot of other sports have introduced these sorts of neuromuscular training programs as part of warm-ups for grassroots sport and higher level sport as well, with great success. And the success is that they've been proven to reduce injury rates within their sport. This is similar in that it's been developed specifically for dancers, and it's a free resource, and it's online now, and it is a neuromuscular training program. And if I can start the videos, and hopefully they're going to work, turn my laser pointer off. Is that working? No. See if these work for us, Aaron. If not, they did work before when I practiced. But if they're not going to work, I do urge you to go to the website. But effectively, these are very basic exercises you've probably done before, but they are either strength or balance related. And then it's not just for ankle sprains, it's for other types of injuries as well. And no, they don't seem to be working, sadly, which is a real shame. But they are designed specifically for dancers to be done as either part of a warm-up or a session on itself, perhaps at the end of a day. And if you do the whole session by itself, it normally would take 20 minutes or so, but it does sort of cover a lot of bases in terms of a whole body warm-up and an injury prevention mechanism all at the same time. So please do check out Strength and Motion and the 11th Dance program. It's a very good resource, and it's a free resource for you guys to use. Now, when it comes to ankle sprain management, let's say you have you've done all your hard work, you've done your 11 dance program, but somehow you still manage to sprain your ankle. You pick up that acute injury you didn't want to pick up. And you need to give it then a bit of peace and love. And the peace and love that I talked to before is a new acronym for acute injury management. So it doesn't have to be an ankle sprain, but it can be any sort of acute injury. You can give it a bit of peace and love. So we have protection, elevation, avoid anti-inflammatories, compression, education, load, optimism, vascularization, and exercise. So this was made to replace the old RICE or RICER or police. And the thing about those acronyms is they used to have ICE as part of acute injury management. And I still believe that ICE is important. So I made up my own acronym. And so you can get this today from me for free, but I made up Peace and I Love. And Peace and I Love is something that I recommend you use the next time you maybe pick yourself up an unfortunate injury. And I still think ICE has a role in terms of pain management. And so if you still think that you like ICE and want to use ICE, then I think that's absolutely fine. So just remember this acronym, Peace and I Love, the next time you maybe have yourself an injury, and follow the protocol here today. And this particular reference, this acronym, if you do Google search, Peace and Love Injury Management, you'll be able to find the original paper that wrote this, and also a bit more information on how to apply it. So that was it in terms of ankle sprain. You understand what it is. You know a prevention program, and you also know how to manage it a little bit if it comes along. But number one is that you get it checked out by the physio. Now we're going to talk about posterior ankle impingement. So how do we present? Who here, again, imaginary hands. I'm sure we have some ballet dancers in the group today, and I imagine we also have some female ballet dancers specifically. Now, it's not to say that male dancers don't get posterior ankle impingement. They definitely do. but it does seem to be more the females that get posterior ankle impingement, and that is, of course, generally because of the being on point mechanism. Posterior ankle impingement is a nasty one. It is a repetitive injury generally, as in it starts with low-level symptoms and then just builds up and builds up and builds up. Now, the thing about posterior ankle impingement is normally they start on what's called an unstable ankle. So this is where our ankle sprain management kicks in. And if you've ever had an ankle sprain before, your chances of developing subsequent posterior ankle impingement are far higher. So this is why I've been banging the drum about managing your ankle sprains, and particularly if you're a chronic ankle sprainer, you're at even higher risk of developing a posterior ankle impingement. And what you'll end up is 2 injuries for the price of 1, which is, as a dancer, a really crap scenario, and I urge you to avoid it. And so trying to manage ankles and posterior ankle impingement at the same time is a key part of staying on stage. So when it comes to posterior ankle impingement specifically, the prevention measures are generally considered to be a good level of calf strength, good levels of ballet technique, i.e. how you go on point and how you go on to demi-point and how you achieve those positions. You can add in the Elmhurst Dance 11 program as well, because some elements of that will help the posterior ankle impingement presentations as well. But in terms of the level of strength that we think you need, generally it's considered that you need to do 30 single leg heel raises as a good indicator of calf strength. And if you can do good 30 calf raises with good levels of technique, then you're probably okay. It doesn't mean that you're never going to get posterior ankle impingement, but it's a very good start. Now, if unfortunately, again, this ever sets in, and I'm sorry for you if it does, this is an absolute one, again, that you need to go see the physio for, or someone in your medical setup to get this managed. This is not a case of give it some rest and let it settle down and then go again. They just don't tend to go away, no matter how long you leave them. There's something that need a plan around. You need to deal with the things that contribute to it happening in the first place, whether that's your strength, your technique, a previous ankle injury, for example. If you do get it, you can rehab your way out of it with some sensible interventions and load management. But sometimes they don't always go that way, and particularly if you leave them late and go to the physio too late and train into too much pain, then you have to resort to these sorts of things, injections, which then means time off. And as soon as you're getting into injection territory, you may down the line, if you have left things way too late, potentially need surgery, particularly if your ankle is deemed to be unstable. And if you've had multiple ankle sprains, then you might be a surgery candidate. So it is a last resort, and we don't want to be reaching for the knife straight away, but that is a possible consequence of this. So the obvious one, therefore, my top tip is, at the first sign of posterior ankle impingement, please get it assessed, much like the ankle sprain. We don't want to be sitting on these things for too long. If you're getting pain in the back of your ankle, go and see the sports doc or physio straight away. And also always finish your ankle rehab, because if your ankle's not fully rehabbed from an ankle sprain, you are going to set yourself up for potentially for one of these things. So we talk about posterior ankle impingement and management. This is the Royal Ballet's calf rise protocol. I think it's been taken from Australian Ballet as well, who use this. There are a few ballet companies which use a calf rise protocol, and it's integrated into ballet class every day. And the idea behind the calf rise protocol is that we maintain a baseline level of strength for all the dancers within the company to avoid this very common injury within the ballet company. And to be fair, it is, I believe it's definitely, well, I know it's been very successful in reducing injury rates within the Australian Ballet Company, and certainly I would say that posterior ankle impingement is less common here than it used to be. It's not a bigger thing. And I think one of the things that really helps us though is that the dancers have awareness of what this issue is, and they do present fairly early when it comes along, so we can manage it and get on top of it. I'm just looking at the time, and I know we're probably are getting a bit pressed now, but I've got one more injury to talk about, and then we've also got a little bit left about the team around the dancer. I'm going to try and pick up the pace a little bit on this. Lower leg bone stress prevention, adequate levels of fitness for your activity. I mean, this should be one of really the easiest injuries to prevent is bone stress, because it just means, you know, number one, I'll get my laser pointer again, being fit, you know, for your sport, or being fit for your event. It just requires having adequate nutrition and sleep. And it also requires you just doing the appropriate amount of training. You know, training can be hard, but that's fine as long as you've built up to it. And it's when these things get out of balance that although sadly that the bone injuries tend to start to set in. And therefore, if you do pick up a bone injury, then sadly this generally will mean some time off, so some rest or modified activity. You would have to address some of the contributing factors. You need to then go back and look at your nutrition, sign yourself up to a graduated return to dance, and consider this other thing called REDS, which I'll go through in the next slide. So for me, lower leg bone stress is obviously, you know, when the bone tissue is in stress and therefore is painful and stopping you from doing your activity, is, you know, if you've got any pain over a bone, you should report that straight away. And that's one of my top tips as well. It's one of those don't even think about it scenarios. It's like pain over a bone, go see the physio. I'm not going to think twice, particularly if that pain persists and is overnight and you're keeping you awake. That's a reasonably good sign that it might be bone pain. And if it's a pain at night over a bone, yeah, you're definitely going to see the physio or doc the next day. I think that'd be a good idea. And the reason why I press so much on early identification is, again, it's like if you get onto this early at the first sign, when it's really low level symptoms, you might be able to manage your training load and keep dancing. When you let the pain go on too long, the dysfunction kicks in, and it's identified, and the progress of the pathology gets so much that you then are forced to take time off. That's not a scenario that anyone wants to be in, the dancer, the company, or the healthcare team. So my top tip is get it identified early, manage the load early, deal with some of the risk factors, and then everything's just a lot easier for the team to deal with, yourselves and the team to deal with. So I just want to dwell on this REDS thing a little bit, because this is an issue in dance. It's also an issue in sport, but it's just an issue in activities or, you know, occupancies where your daily energy expenditure levels are really, really high. And as a dancer, your daily energy expenditures levels are really high. So when we are talking about energy, we are talking about things like calories, and REDS is effectively, as it says here, is when your energy availability does not equal your energy demand. So specifically in dance or in sport, if you aren't getting enough energy for the demands of your sport, then you are not going to meet your tissue needs for remodeling. And that's going to present different issues. Now, it doesn't matter if you have the occasional day like that necessarily, or a couple of days, but if that relative energy balance continues for a period of time, this has lots of different consequences the longer you leave it and the more severe you leave it. And the reason I brought up back this risk factor table back to our sort of yellow box scenario is that the things here in the yellow box, training load, sleep, nutrition, and health choices, are actually all close to 100% in your control, and you can have an ability to influence all of these. And these are the things that stop REDS, or that relative energy deficiency, being an issue in the first place. If we take the scenario a bit further and REDS is established and we go around this wheel here, we can see all the body systems that are interrupted or affected by a relative energy deficiency. So this is simply from not eating enough to meet the demands of your sport. And when you're looking at some of the colors on the wheel and some of the systems that are affected, it's not just a bone health issue that you could end up with. You can end up with issues that of just global fatigue, gastrointestinal upset, just medical illness, increased medical illnesses, some mental health issues, tendon health issues, and your ability to recover generally from anything is going to be compromised. So again, this REDS picture is something we want to absolutely avoid within dance, but unfortunately dance is vulnerable to this sort of picture. And as I say, when we go back to the yellow box, if you're not controlling these 4 risk factors here, you set up a REDS picture, we end up messing with this remodeling phase effectively because our body systems don't have the energy or ability to remodel effectively. You affect this phase, you slip down the right hand of this model, and you end up with the overuse injury. So I'm just trying to tie in a number of different messages from today in terms of what you're in control of, what sort of injuries do dancers get, and what sort of possible outcomes there are. And hopefully there's been enough of a connect the dots moment there to see that you are in control of a lot in terms of your injury and injury prevention management as a dancer. So I encourage you to take on some of the lessons from those 3 typical injuries in dance and take some of those messages away today. Last thing before I hit my last 5 minutes is that some of the things like the 11 dance program and the calf rise protocol, I'm just going to caveat that and say, as good as those things are, if you're not already doing them as part of your program, please don't turn up tomorrow and tell them that I said you needed to do it. This is your artistic staff or your coaches. And please don't just start doing it by yourself and not tell your artistic staff or coaches. This should ideally be something that's integrated into your normal program such that the training loads is appropriate. And with any new exercise, you need to exercise caution, and it should be done with a professional and supervision. So please definitely implore you to take on the 11 dance and calf rise protocol message. But how you implement it, bring in the people around you, and please speak to your artistic staff before starting doing that stuff. And I just thought I'd mention that while I remember. Finally, we talk about healthcare for ballet dancers. At Ballet Healthcare, we're fortunate enough to have the resource and space to have a multidisciplinary team around the dancer. So we have the dancer in the middle. And every day at Ballet Healthcare, we've probably got some sort of representation of a therapist, a doctor, a nutritionist, psychologist, S&C, coaching. All the dancers of the Royal Ballet Company have access to these sorts of things and these different experts in each area. Knowing that there are younger dancers here, there are professionals, non-professionals, students in the group today, we don't always have access to a multidisciplinary team. And I've highlighted a couple of professions or professionals here that I'd probably say that if you don't have a team or set up around you, like Royal Ballet or some of the other ballet companies, then you need to have at least a network of coaches, therapists, or doctors that you can call on in case you do get yourself in a bit of an injury situation. There's nothing worse than getting injured and then trying to respond on how to address this. You should really have your network of practitioners around you first, just in case, like your insurance policy, that if something does happen, you know who you refer to. And obviously, depending on the issue, depending on the time, whatever, you might go to a doctor first, a physio first, a coach first, but generally any one of these people first should be able to pick you up and send you down the right management path. And just want to say as well that regarding this diagram, it's not to say that these other professionals or professions don't have aren't of equal value. I think that they are all of equal value when managing an injury process, but in terms of giving you a diagnosis, a prognosis, and then an initial injury plan, these three professions are probably better suited to that. Finally, the dancer and therapist relationship. So this could be a physio, or it could be whoever is responsible for injury management in your setup. But generally, it's a physio is a good port of call. It could even be a doctor. But I really think sometimes dancers and athletes can be scared to come to the physio. And I know where that fear comes from, because you're scared because physio is going to tell you to stop or tell you to take time off. And I'm just here to tell you that the physio is your friend. And if they are a physio that's any good, and particularly working in performance setups today, the physio is the one looking for creative ways to keep you going. It's only when we're forced to do we ever have to tell the dancer to stop? But if you pick something up early enough, if it's not that serious, particularly with those repetitive overuse injuries, we can always find ways to keep you going and keep you moving if it's appropriate. So I think that, you know, the dancer therapist relationship is a special one. We're there to help. We have the professional know-how, as well as other professionals around us, physiologists, S&C coaches, ballet coaches. Generally, all now the knowledge is there to be able to appropriately load manage and injury manage at the same time to help you to keep dancing and performing. And if you've got the right network around you, you have people to support you to do that. So you shouldn't be afraid of coming forward if an injury presentation starts to creep into your daily work. So that's it, guys. There we go. Whistle-stop tour of ballet injury prevention and management all in one. The summary is ballet injuries are common. That's, you know, we can't get around it. Injury is a hazard of the job, but you do have a huge influence on the risk of some types of injuries, and you can have a huge influence on how long your recovery might be. Early identification in early management is my mantra, and I really do think that, you know, you guys, I urge you to flag up issues as soon as you can to your injury prevention or injury management teams. Use the expert around you. They are your friend. They are knowledgeable. They are generally all performance oriented and want to keep you on stage. And yeah, that is it really for my presentation today. This was a little bit of a summary of my lessons. So if you remember throughout the presentation, is your performance, your body, your responsibility. Your choices on a daily basis have a big bearing on your injury risk, so choose wisely. If you ever sprain your ankle, get it checked out by a physio, because there could be potentially lots of other consequences if you don't. And finally, if you want to be a professional dancer, help your body adapt and recover and go back to that yellow box. That's it. And thank you for all the people that helped put this presentation together today. Sorry for going a little bit long today, but there was lots to fit in.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Shane. That was a wonderful presentation. And I can see that we've got a little bit of commentary in the chat box here. We do have time maybe for just one question. So
I'm happy to sit back if people are happy to sit back as well. Like I've got an easy 5 or 10 minutes to answer a few more questions, Aaron, if people want to hang back. But.
Oh, fantastic. Okay, so if people have any questions, please do feel free to put them into the chat or unmute yourself and speak. I'm just going to hold there for a second. I can see that Renata has a question. Renata, please go ahead. Renata, would you like to speak? Or was that maybe just an accidental hand?
Is it? No. My question is if you use Pilates technique, or if you use from the Pilates any apparatus, reformer or another apparatus?
Yeah, definitely. Pilates coaches and Pilates instructors are part of the Royal Ballet setup. They're an important part of our healthcare team. Apologies if I missed them off the little diagram there, but they are definitely part of our team. And for us, it's another form of conditioning, and certainly the work they do around, it's a form of conditioning. So it's S&C, it's neuromuscular training, it's lots of different things all in one. It's technical work, so it does cover a lot of bases. So yeah, we see Pilates coaches and instructor a big part of our injury prevention and injury management processes and team.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
No problem.
We did have some other really excellent comments in the chat about some of the other fabulous practitioners that can help with injury for dancers. So we talked about osteopaths, Pilates, and gyrokinesis practitioners as well. Any of you that don't already know about the One Dance UK Healthcare Practitioners Directory and the National Institute of Dance Medicine and Science, you can find healthcare practitioners of many different types who are available across the UK who support dancers. I can see that Dorcas has put a question into the chat. She says, unfortunately, dancers, especially in the corps de ballet, often don't have the ability to affect their load and can be pressurized to perform in every show or stop completely. How do you deal with this?
Yeah, no, really, really good question. And I knew it when I put it up, someone would ask it actually, is that, in that yellow box scenario, I said that, you have an ability, I use my words carefully, you have an ability to influence your load. Now, it's not like, unfortunately, no, you can't rewrite the ballet repertoire, or you can't necessarily change what's been written for you to do as your job in rehearsal or performance. But what you can do is influence it in terms of, if you're struggling, you should go feel empowered to let someone know that, it's on you as the dancer. And if you've got the ballet healthcare team involved in that process early enough, then it's far easier to go have conversations with artistic staff or scheduling staff and say, there's potentially an injury picture on the horizon. We're trying to avoid that. Can we manage this dancer's workload over the next couple of weeks while we try to get on top of this? Now, that's a really common conversation here at the Royal Ballet, is that by dancers coming in early, we can have the conversations far earlier with artistic staff about managing workload. And it's not this sort of binary thing of I'm on completely or I'm off completely, which we want to avoid. I don't think that helps anyone. So no, you may not be able to influence completely your schedule, but you should be able to at least have a conversation. And I would hope that the management, the artistic staff, whoever are dealing with, sympathetic and wise enough to know that that they can't force you onto doing things if an injury state has already started, or if an injury process has already started.
Yeah, and that process of trying to find the confidence and the right words to advocate for yourself, that's definitely something that we certainly want to try and help dancers to be able to do effectively, because that can also be a really tricky conversation sometimes. So for sure, that's so very important. We've got also, sorry, just one other question from Catherine in the chat. She says, what is your opinion about plyometric exercises for the jumps?
Yeah, I mean, it's quite a broad question. I think what you mean, I'm going to speculate here, I think what you mean is, do I think they're good for jumps? Well, it depends who you are. Like, if you're a good jumper, then you probably don't need to do loads of extra either jump training or plyometric training. I think that with the word of warning that comes with plyometric training is that it has to be appropriate for what other training you're doing around it. So you need to be mindful, firstly and primarily, about your ballet training load, how many times you're your overall load, but particularly your jump load with the current sort of rehearsals and performance schedule you've got. And if that's already high, you definitely don't want to be adding additional jump training on top of it or additional plyometric training. It's not appropriate to do additional plyometric in those times where you're already training or performing heavily as well. If jumps is a weak point for you and you want to work on it, then you probably need to look for windows in your performance and rehearsal schedule where you can work, increase your plyometric training to improve your jump performance. But you have to find those windows, and generally they might be in the mid-season break or the off-season, or there are natural dips in the schedule, and they're the sort of windows I'd be looking for, because I think most dance companies and dancers, have a fairly hectic schedule most of the time, and actually mostly it's about getting enough rest, recovery, and fueling appropriately is probably the bigger things to think about. I think that's what you meant from the question, Catherine. I'm sorry if I didn't quite get it right.
Catherine, did you have any other things you wanted to add in that question? Please do feel free to put more into the chat if you do. And I suppose if anyone else has any other questions, please do put them into the chat. One thing that occurred to me that I wanted to ask you about was about posterior ankle impingement. Yes. And the fact that this is a really common issue with ballet dancers. Yep. And from a kind of structural perspective, are there any non-modifiable factors? So you talked about the modifiable and the sort of modifiable and the actual modifiable risk factors. Are there any non-modifiable factors that might increase the risk of that injury?
There used to be a thought that certain shaped bones in your feet, namely the shape of your heel bone, made you more at risk of posterior ankle impingement because there's less space in the back of your heel when you point your toe. So it's called something, a really bony overgrowth called the os trigonum. And I think there's conflicting evidence at the moment to say that, if you've got a really bony heel, basically that you're definitely going to get a posterior ankle impingement. In fact, it's a mixed picture. There are some people that have an os trigonum that never go on to develop a posterior ankle impingement, and there's some people that do have a bony ankle and then get posterior ankle impingement. But equally, there are people that don't have an os trigonum at all, and they get it as well. And I think the bigger risk factor, again, for your development of posterior ankle impingement is either weak calves and feet, and a combination of an unstable or hypermobile ankle through either genetics or previous injury. So I'd really, os trigonum you can't do anything about. Like you talked about non-modifiable errors. If you saw in on a scan, I think the good news at least is now don't panic. And you don't need to go calling a surgeon and say, take my os trigonum out, just in case I get a posterior ankle impingement down the line. I think you don't have to do that anymore. I think if you've got a os trigonum, it's not the end of the world. I think the bigger thing is watch your technique and get your calf strong, and hopefully everything will be fine.
Yeah. Oh, that's really helpful to think about. I was just kind of thinking about the many different things that could potentially cause problems there. And it's nice to know that the evidence is pretty unclear about those bony issues. And I can see that Catherine's put one more comment into the chat. She says, can ballet bar movements be used as a part of the exercise protocol if we manipulate intensity and volume?
Definitely in a rehab context, absolutely, and 100% encourage ballet bar movements to be used in some of these earlier rehab scenarios, particularly for some of the injuries we talked about today, your ankle sprain, your posterior ankle impingement, lower limb bone stress injuries. The ballet bar exercises are inherently neuromuscular, they're motor control, they're balance, they are non-impact exercises that are obviously highly specific for the dance that you're doing. So, therefore we use it as soon as we can here at the Royal Ballet. They are an excellent form of rehab. What is someone said to me the other week, again, it reminded me of a quote: rehab is just normal training, but in the presence of pathology. And really what that's saying is your rehab should replicate normal training as much as possible, but you just work around the problem for as long as that's a problem. But as soon as things resolve, that dancer or that athlete should just drop back into their normal routine. So if they can do things within their pathology and within their pain that are appropriate for their sport or the dance, then they should do it. So bar would be an excellent one to start with.
Excellent. I think that brings us to the end of the session, and all that's left to say is a very large thank you to you, Shane, for your time and expertise and for sharing the excellent presentation. And also a big thank you to everyone who attended. And we really hope that these sessions are useful for you. And if you have any ideas or suggestions for other sessions that might be useful, please do let us know.
Yeah,
so
just before I finish up there, and I did want to, and it's a shame everyone, a few people have left, but I did want to plug the NIDM's injury clinics as well. I missed it in my presentation, but sometimes getting access to high quality specific injury management and healthcare is really difficult, and NIDM's offers a great network of professionals there for us, available to access through your GP. So I'd encourage people to use that.
Yeah. And you can find out more on the National Institute website. So please do engage with those services. And thank you again. So I hope you all have a wonderful evening, and thank you. Take care.
Thank you.